Hello, crafty friends. I'm Lean from Studio Kato, and I'm so glad you're joining me again today. Today I'm making a soft baby card using some watercoloring, some ink smooshing, and some simple paper piecing. I'm using mostly Mama Elephant products today, and I'm starting with a stamp set called Wish Upon a Star. I really love these cute little bunnies for baby cards, so I'm stamping a few of them out onto some watercolor cardstock. This is the Canson Montval 200 GSM cardstock. I prepped my cardstock with anti-static powder, so the embossing powder we'll use later on only sticks to the ink. And the ink I'm using is Versafine Vintage Sepia. I chose for a brown ink, but I did stamp it twice to get a slightly darker look, because I thought black would be too harsh with the look I was going for. I embossed that with Wow Clear Gloss Superfine Embossing Powder, and now I'll be coloring these in with my Karen markers. I'm not paying too much attention to where my light source is in this card. I'm just coloring these bunnies by making the face the lightest part. I'm doing the same for the other bunny later on. What you see now is in real time, but I'll speed it up later. I put down a little bit of color with my marker directly to the paper, and then I'm just using a fine paintbrush with some clean water on it to blend that out. These markers, or at least the set I have, do come with blending markers as well, but I just prefer using the water instead. This is my favorite brown marker in the set. It's the sandstone color. It's a really soft light brown. I really like it. And I use it pretty much all the time for my critters. If you don't have these markers, you can use your regular watercolors to color these images, or even your distress inks or other dye inks. I know the Pinkfresh Studio dye inks, because those are what I have, are very great for watercoloring as well. You just smoosh them down onto a slick surface and pick them up with a paintbrush. Whenever I show my coloring process in a video, I want to show it with as much detail as possible, so that's why I'm zoomed in so much. But I think it's important to note what I have off to the side on my desk. I obviously have a cup of water at the ready to clean my brush and to bring water to the paper, but more importantly, I also have a clean rag off to the side. Because when working with these small images, you don't want a brush that is too wet. When your brush is too wet, you have less control over where the water and thus where the paint goes. So after I wet my brush, I just dab it off onto that cloth I have, and then I bring it to the paper. So I never bring a super wet brush to my image. And that's also what I do when I take away some of the color, like you saw me do right there. Picking up some of that color you already put down is one of the neatest tricks in watercolor. You can easily do this when the paint is still wet. You can also do this with dry paint, but it takes a little bit more practice. And you can absolutely not do this with alcohol markers, so that's why I prefer watercolor. You can always take a little bit away. Just go in with an almost dry brush, pick up some of the water or the pigment, and you'll be left with a darker area. Now for the tail and for the wings on the other bunny later, I'm using some gray, and these gray markers don't blend as well. So that's why I wet the area first, just with a brush and water, and then I drop in some of the color with my marker. I'm coloring in the clouds with some peach. I think I used peach 1 for this cloud for the first layer, and then I dropped in some of the peach 2. That's what the markers are called. For the second layer to darken it up. And for the smallest clouds, I only used the first peach color. When coloring clouds, it's best to not try to color them too evenly. It's nice to see some fluffy textures in there, and that's really easy to achieve with watercolor if you just let the water flow. And I really like how this peach color looks with the brown that I used for the bunnies, but also the sepia ink that we used to stamp the images out. Okay, on to the last bunny. I'm using the exact same colors here. I'm using the sandstone marker for the bunny itself, then some gray for the tail and the wings, and some peach for the inside of its ear. And once I'm finished with coloring these, I will let them dry completely, and then I'll fussy cut them out. You can also use the coordinating dies. I think they're available, but I don't like to use them. I'm centering a stitched oval die by Pinkfresh Studios onto another piece of watercolor cardstock. This is A2 sized, to cut a window out of it. I'll then also die cut some cloud borders for inside the window. I only ended up using one. These dies are from the Slim Scenescapes Rainbow add-on by Mama Elephant, and I die cut them as well. And I'm going to color a background and my clouds with some ink smushing. I'm smushing some Concord 9th inks, this is Aqua, Sky, and Peacock, onto a slick surface, and I'm just smushing down a separate piece of cardstock in there. And I'm coloring my clouds the same way, only with different inks. I used Sorbet and Grapefruit and Buttercup for those. Now I also die cut this rainbow 3 times out of white cardstock and a couple of times from different pattern papers. This rainbow die is also from the Mama Elephant Slim Scenescapes Rainbow add-on die set, and I'm just figuring out where each color should go. As you can see, I didn't die cut the whole rainbow. It wasn't necessary. I was gonna cut it off anyway. I ended up trimming a very large piece off after all, so this was absolutely large enough for my card. And I also ended up using only 5 of the 6 rainbow arches that this die cuts, because I thought it was a little bit too wide for my card design. I'm just assembling all of that together. I used different pattern paper packs from Action. These are really cheap. These are the 6x6 pattern papers, and they come in really soft colors. Now I'm assembling this separately, just with some purple tape to keep it all together, and this will make it really easy to add it onto my card later. Having it as a whole like this will be really helpful in assembling the card. Now I arranged it all together and I didn't think my cloud border stood out enough, so I'm adding a stitched detail, just a dash line, with a brown colored pencil. I would use a fine liner for this, but I didn't have one in the brown I wanted. Now I'm prepping that cardstock, all of the pieces, with my anti-static powder tool, and I'm stamping some of the stars that come in the stamp set in Versamark ink onto the different pieces that I cut. The cloud border is also adhered temporarily onto the back of the frame, so I know where everything goes, and again, it will be easier to assemble. I really like how these background pieces turned out with the ink smushing, and all the ink colors I used and all the supplies I used are listed in the description below. I embossed the stars with Gold Rich Pale embossing powder by Wow, and now it's time to assemble the card. I am adding foam tape over this entire frame piece. This is double folded foam tape, so it adds extra dimension and it's easier to cut that way. I'm making sure to leave some space on the top of the clouds there to add my rainbow behind it, so I'm not adding foam tape right there. Now I'm just adding my blue ink smushed background piece to a top folding white note card, making sure the right side is up. And then I can add the frame with all the foam tape, peeling all of those backers off. It does take a little bit, but the dimension is worth it. Just centering that onto my card. And that already looks pretty, I think. I really like the background for this one. Also adding a couple of pieces of foam tape to the back of the rainbow, though I'm making sure to not add any to where the rainbow would go over the frame, because that's already propped up, and that would be a lot of extra dimension. So I'm just adding some glue there. And then I'll let that completely dry and trim the rainbow off. And then I played around with all my images and arranged them how I wanted them to be. And now I can add those with some foam squares. I thought about adding a sentiment to this card and even made a couple of sentiment banners for this and ended up using none of them. But I just really liked the way it looked without, and I just thought the sentiment strip was a little bit too heavy off on the bottom of the card. Just a couple more pieces and then I'll move on to the matching envelope. I'm using a Japanese paper here. It's handmade paper and it has these fibers and seeds in it. It's really, really pretty up close, but it's really hard to punch out. So I basically ended up just making a mark with my punch and ended up cutting all the corners out with scissors. But that's really easy to do, and I have to do that a lot of the times anyway, so it's not really any extra effort. I'm adding some more peach clouds to this envelope, using some ink blending and a stencil by My Favorite Things. I'm using some of the same inks that I used for the cloud, although that was ink smushing, on the card. And I'm lightly blending just the edge of it, because right here it looks like I blended all of that piece, all of the middle piece pink. It's not, it's mostly white. Only the edge right above the stencil is what I ink blended over. And I'm darkening up the inks as I go to the bottom of the corner. Blending clouds like this on two opposing corners on a piece, going from light to dark, really gives depth to it. I made a card like this a while back. I don't have a video on that, but it's really beautiful. I highly recommend trying this for a card layout as well. But it's super easy to do, so I thought it would be a nice touch for a matching envelope. I'm just assembling the envelope with some Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, and that's it. That finishes up the card and envelope. I hope you liked the video. I really liked the result. I hope you do too. I really like the non-traditional rainbow and the ink smushed background. If you're curious about any of the supplies I used, you can find them all listed in the description box. And if you like this video, I hope you give it a thumbs up, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to read them. And subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.